Who were the daughters of Adam? It sounds like a simple question, but try to answer it. Open your Bible, search from Genesis to Revelation. You will find something strange. Their names are nowhere. Their stories are gone. Millions of people have read the book of Genesis for thousands of years. They know Adam, they know Eve, they know Cain, Abel and Seth, but almost nobody stops to ask about the daughters. Genesis 5:4 states it plainly. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 more years and he had other sons and daughters. There it is, right in the text. Adam had daughters, multiple daughters, yet not a single one is named. Not a single one is given a story, a purpose, or even a passing mention beyond that one verse. And that silence should trouble you, because the Bible is not a careless book. It records names with great precision. It tracks bloodlines across dozens of generations. It names cities, rivers, mountains, and even the trees in the garden. But when it comes to the daughters of the first man who ever lived, the record goes blank. Most people assume the daughters simply were not important. They believe the genealogies focused on men because that was the custom of ancient times. But that explanation falls apart when you look closer. The Bible does name women when they matter. It names Sarah, it names Rebecca, it names Rachel and Leah, it names Rachel and Ruth. These women appear at turning points in the story of God's people. Their names are recorded because what they did shaped the direction of history. So the question is not whether ancient writers could name women. They clearly could. The question is why they chose not to name the very first daughters of humankind. Something else is at work here, and it goes deeper than cultural habit. In this story, we will move through 3 layers of discovery. First, we will pull back the curtain on what the Bible leaves out and ask whether the silence was an accident or a decision. Then, we will dig into the ancient texts that were left outside the Bible, the ones that actually do name these daughters and describe what they did. And finally, we will follow a trail of forbidden bloodlines that connects Adam's unnamed daughters to some of the most shocking events in Scripture. Events that changed the course of human history and may still echo in the world today. And once we understand this first layer, the real story begins. The first thing we need to understand is how the Bible handles its genealogies. In the ancient world, a genealogy was not just a family tree. It was a statement of power. It told you who had the right to rule, who carried the blessing of God, and whose blood was pure. The genealogies of Genesis are the backbone of the entire Old Testament. They connect Adam to Noah. They connect Noah to Abraham. They connect Abraham to David. And they connect David to the promised Messiah. Every link in that chain matters. Every name carries weight. Every generation is accounted for. Except the daughters. Think about what that means. The writers of Genesis cared deeply about lineage. They recorded who fathered whom for page after page. They noted ages at the time of fathering. They recorded lifespans down to the year. This was not casual writing. This was legal documentation of the most sacred bloodline on earth. And in that documentation, the daughters are erased, not ignored. Erased. There is a difference. When something is ignored, it is simply overlooked. When something is erased, it is removed on purpose. And the evidence suggests that the removal of the daughters was deliberate. Here is why. The Hebrew tradition had access to far more texts than what ended up in our modern Bible. The early Jewish scholars debated fiercely about which books should be considered holy scripture. Some books made the cut, others did not. And among the books that did not make the cut, several contained detailed information about Adam's daughters, their names, their marriages, their roles in the expansion of the human race. These details existed, they were known, and they were excluded. The question that should burn in your mind is this. What was so dangerous about these daughters that their identities had to be removed from the most important book in human history? Subscribe if you have ever wondered what the Bible is not telling you, because this journey is just beginning, and the next chapter takes us to a figure even more controversial than the missing daughters, a woman who supposedly came before Eve herself. Let us look at the numbers for a moment. Adam lived 930 years according to Genesis 5005. During those centuries, he fathered sons and daughters. Scholars who study ancient population models estimate that Adam and Eve could have had dozens of children over such a long lifespan. Some traditions say the number was as high as 30 or even more. Every single one of those daughters lived, grew up, married, and had children of their own. They were the mothers of entire branches of the human family. Without them, the human race could not have continued past the first generation. They were essential, absolutely essential. And yet the Bible treats them as if they never existed. This pattern of selective silence appears throughout Genesis. When the text describes the generations from Adam to Noah, it follows a strict formula. It gives the father's name, his age when his first notable son was born, and then adds, "and he had other sons and daughters." That phrase repeats again and again. It is almost mechanical, and it serves a clear purpose. It acknowledges that daughters existed without giving them any identity. It admits they were there without admitting who they were. This is not an accident of history. This is editorial control. Someone, at some point in the long chain of transmission, made a choice, and that choice shaped everything we think we know about the first families of the earth. Chapter 2. Before Eve, the Lilith question. Now we step into dangerous territory. Because before we can understand the missing daughters, we need to confront a question that has haunted Jewish and Christian scholars for centuries. Was Eve really the first woman? The standard reading of Genesis tells us yes. God created Adam from the dust. Then God created Eve from Adam's rib. One man, one woman. The beginning of everything. But there is a problem with that reading. And the problem sits right there in the first 2 chapters of Genesis. Genesis 1027 says God created man in his own image. Male and female he created them, both at the same time, equal, side by side. But then Genesis 2:22 tells a different story. It says God took a rib from Adam's side and made a woman from it, and he brought her to the man. These 2 accounts do not easily fit together. In the first, man and woman are created simultaneously. In the second, the woman comes after the man, built from his body. For centuries, rabbis noticed this contradiction, and some of them proposed a startling answer. There was another woman before Eve. Her name was Lilith. Now, Lilith does not appear by name in the canonical Bible, but she appears in the margins. She appears in the oldest Jewish commentaries. She appears in the oldest Jewish commentaries. She appears in the alphabet of Ben Sira, a medieval text that draws on much older traditions. And she appears in Isaiah 34:14, where the Hebrew word Lilith is used to describe a creature of the wilderness. The ancient rabbis taught that Lilith was Adam's true first companion, created from the same dust at the same moment, just as Genesis 1027 describes. She was not made from Adam. She was made alongside Adam, equal in every way, and that equality became the source of all conflict. According to the tradition, Lilith refused to be subordinate to Adam. She refused to accept a lesser role. When Adam insisted on his authority, Lilith spoke the sacred name of God and fled the Garden of Eden. She went to the shores of the Red Sea. God sent 3 angels to bring her back. She refused to return, and from that moment she became something else entirely. No longer Adam's wife, no longer part of the garden's order. She became a figure of exile, rebellion, and a separate, unsanctioned lineage. Now, why does this matter for the daughters of Adam? Because if Lilith existed, then the story of human origins is more complicated than we were taught. If there was a woman before Eve, and that woman left the garden and started her own line of descendants, then the human race may not have one single mother. It may have 2. And the children of Lilith would be something different from the children of Eve. They would carry a different origin, a different spiritual signature, a different relationship to God. Some scholars argue that this is exactly why Lilith was removed from the mainstream biblical text. Her existence raises too many questions. If Adam had a first wife who was his equal, what does that say about the creation of Eve from a rib? Was Eve a replacement? Was she deliberately designed to be more obedient? And what happened to Lilith's children? Did they survive? Did they mix with the children of Adam and Eve? Did they become the unnamed daughters, whose identities the Bible worked so hard to erase? The tradition says Lilith bore children in the wilderness, hundreds of them. Some texts call them demons, others call them spirits, but a few ancient sources describe them as something more human than we might expect. They were beings who lived outside the protection of God's covenant. They were wild, they were free, and they were dangerous, not because of what they did, but because of what they represented. They represented an alternative, a path not taken, a version of humanity that did not bend to the established order. Like if this connection between Lilith and the missing daughters is opening your mind to something new, share this with someone who loves digging into biblical mysteries. Because what comes next takes us to actual ancient books that name the daughters by name. Think about the implications. If the daughters of Adam mentioned in Genesis 5:4 included descendants of Lilith, or women who carried the memory of that first rebellion, then their erasure makes perfect sense. You do not erase something that does not matter. You erase something that threatens the story you are trying to tell. And the story the biblical editors wanted to tell was one of a single, clean lineage. Adam to Seth to Noah to Abraham. One unbroken line of faithful men carrying God's promise. The daughters complicated that line. They introduced other possibilities, other connections, other bloodlines that could not be controlled. The Lilith tradition also changes how we read the fall. In the standard telling, Eve is tempted by the serpent, eats the forbidden fruit, and shares it with Adam. Sin enters the world through Eve. But if Lilith already left the garden before the fall, then the first act of rebellion was not Eve's. It was Lilith's. The first creature to say no to the established order was not deceived by a serpent. She made a conscious choice. She chose freedom over submission, and she paid for it with exile. This matters because it shifts the entire theology of the fall. It suggests that the capacity for rebellion was built into creation from the very beginning. It was not a mistake, it was a feature. And the daughters who came after, both Eve's and possibly Lilith's, carried that capacity within them. They were not just passive figures waiting to be married off to their brothers. They were agents of change, and that is exactly why their names were buried. Chapter 3. The Daughters Named in Forgotten Books. There is an ancient book that most Christians have never read. It was written over 2,000 years ago. It was considered sacred scripture by entire communities of believers. It was quoted and referenced by Jewish and early Christian scholars, and inside its pages it does something remarkable. It names the daughters of Adam and Eve. This book is called the Book of Jubilees. The Book of Jubilees is sometimes called Little Genesis because it retells the stories of Genesis with far more detail. It was written in Hebrew, probably during the 2nd century before Christ. Copies of it were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls in the caves of Qumran. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church considers it part of their official biblical canon to this day. And for our story, it is absolutely critical. Jubilees 4001 through 412 gives us the names we have been searching for. Adam and Eve's first daughter is called Awan. She was born after Cain and Abel. Awan became the wife of Cain. Adam and Eve's second named daughter is called Azura. She became the wife of Seth. There are more daughters mentioned in the following generations, each one given a name and a role in the expansion of the human family. For the first time, the invisible daughters become visible. They have identities, they have marriages, they have purpose, and they are not minor characters. They are the mothers of entire civilizations. Now stop and consider what this means. The information existed. Somebody knew these names. Somebody wrote them down. Somebody preserved them for centuries. And then somebody else decided that this information should not be in the Bible. The Book of Jubilees was excluded from the Hebrew and Protestant canons. It was sidelined, pushed to the margins. Its details about the daughters were effectively buried. But why? The most common scholarly answer is that the Book of Jubilees contains theological ideas that conflicted with the direction the biblical editors wanted to take. Jubilees emphasizes a strict solar calendar. It presents angels as directly involved in human affairs. And it gives women a more prominent role in the earliest chapters of human history. Any one of those elements could have been enough to exclude it, but the naming of the daughters is particularly sensitive because it forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth about early humanity. If Awan married Cain and Azura married Seth, then the first marriages in human history were between brothers and sisters. This is not speculation. This is the logical necessity of the biblical account. If Adam and Eve were the only original parents, then their children had no one else to marry except each other. The Book of Jubilees does not shy away from this, it states it directly. And the biblical editors may have chosen to omit the daughters' names precisely because naming them makes this reality impossible to ignore. Comment below if you had ever heard of the Book of Jubilees before today. You would be surprised how many people have no idea these texts exist. But there is more than just Jubilees. Other ancient texts also preserve information about Adam's daughters. The Cave of Treasures, a Syriac Christian text from around the 4th century, describes how Adam's children were paired off by God himself. It says that each son was given a twin sister as a wife. According to this text, the pairings were divinely ordained. God chose which sister would marry which brother, and any deviation from God's chosen pairings was considered a profound sin. The Life of Adam and Eve, another ancient text preserved in Latin, Greek, and other languages, also provides additional details about the family structure of the first humans. It describes Eve giving birth to multiple sets of twins, each set containing a boy and a girl. These twins were meant for each other. The entire system of early marriage was built on this foundation of sibling pairings. And the daughters were not just brides. They were the co-founders of every family line that followed. The Genesis Rabbah, an important Jewish commentary compiled around the 5th century, also discusses the daughters. It suggests that the daughters of Adam were remarkable in their beauty, and it hints that this beauty played a role in the catastrophic events that would unfold in Genesis chapter 6. Daughters were not background characters. They were catalysts. Their beauty, their choices, and their marriages set in motion a chain of events that would lead to the near destruction of the entire human race. So we now have names, we have roles, we have stories. All of them existed in the ancient world. All of them were known to the communities that shaped the Bible, and all of them were deliberately left out. The silence of Genesis is not an empty silence. It is a loaded silence, a silence full of things someone did not want us to know. And what the ancient rabbis say about the beauty of these daughters connects directly to one of the most mysterious passages in the entire Bible. A passage about beings from heaven coming down to earth. A passage about forbidden desire. And a passage about children who should never have been born. Subscribe now because you do not want to miss what Genesis chapter 6 reveals about the daughters of Adam and the catastrophe they may have caused. One more detail from the Book of Jubilees deserves attention. The text does not simply name the daughters and move on. It places them within a carefully structured timeline. It tells us when they were born, when they married, and when their children were born. This is not casual storytelling. This is deliberate record-keeping. Whoever wrote Jubilees wanted these daughters to be remembered. They wanted future generations to know exactly who these women were and what role they played. The fact that this record was excluded from the Bible tells us something important. Remembering the daughters was considered a threat, and forgetting them was considered necessary for the survival of the theological narrative that would become Orthodox Judaism and, later, Christianity. Chapter 4, Sons of God and Daughters of Men. We have now arrived at one of the most explosive passages in all of Scripture. 6 short verses that have generated more debate, more controversy, and more confusion than almost any other section of the Bible. Genesis 6:1 through 6:4. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The passage is brief, but its implications are enormous. Let us break this down. Who are the sons of God? And who are the daughters of humans? These questions have divided scholars for over 2,000 years. There are 3 major interpretations. The first says the sons of God were descendants of Seth, the righteous line of Adam. The daughters of humans were descendants of Cain, the corrupt line. Their mixing was a spiritual contamination that angered God. The second interpretation says the sons of God were powerful rulers or kings who took women by force, abusing their authority. The third interpretation, and the oldest one, says the sons of God were angels, heavenly beings, supernatural creatures who left their proper place and came down to earth to take human wives. The third interpretation is the most ancient and the most disturbing, and it is the one supported by the earliest Jewish and Christian commentators. The phrase sons of God in Hebrew is Bnei Elohim. This exact phrase appears in Job 1:6 and Job 2:1, where it clearly refers to angelic beings who present themselves before God. It appears in Job 38,000 and Tivans, where it describes beings who sang together at the creation of the world. These were not human beings. They were something else entirely, and according to Genesis 6, they looked at the daughters of humans and wanted them. Now think about this in the context of everything we have discussed. The daughters of Adam were erased from the genealogies, their names were removed, their stories were buried, and here, in Genesis 6, daughters suddenly appear at the center of the greatest crisis in human history before the flood. They are so important that angelic beings abandon heaven for them. They are so significant that their unions produce a race of giants. They are so dangerous that God decides to destroy the entire world because of what happens through them. These were not minor characters. These were the most consequential women in the history of the ancient world, and their identities were hidden from us. The text says these supernatural beings saw that the daughters were beautiful. The Hebrew word for beautiful here is tavot. It is the same word used when God looks at creation and says it is good. These daughters carried something exceptional, something that caught the attention of beings from another realm. Was it just physical beauty, or was it something deeper? Some scholars suggest that these daughters carried a spiritual quality, a connection to the divine image stamped into humanity at creation that made them irresistible to the sons of God. They were not just attractive, they were luminous. They carried the fingerprint of God Himself. Yet the truth hidden in Scripture goes deeper, because the text does not say the sons of God asked permission. It does not say there was a courtship or a covenant. It says they took wives for themselves. The Hebrew word fatuk is yichu. It implies sijay. It implies force. These were not consensual marriages in the modern sense. These were acts of possession, heavenly beings selecting human women and claiming them. And the daughters had no say in the matter, or did they? Some ancient traditions suggest that at least some of these unions were voluntary, that some of Adam's daughters were drawn to the power and beauty of the celestial beings, that the attraction went both ways. And that is perhaps the most dangerous idea of all, because if the daughters chose to unite with the sons of God willingly, then they were not victims. They were participants. They made a decision that altered the course of history. And that decision, that act of choice by unnamed, unrecorded women, led directly to the flood that destroyed the world. Share this with someone who has never heard Genesis 6 explained this way. The standard Sunday school version leaves out almost everything we have just discussed. There is another layer to this passage that often gets overlooked. Genesis 6:3 records God's response to these unions. And the Lord said, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. God sets a countdown, 120 years until judgment. The mixing of heavenly and earthly beings triggers a divine deadline. This is not a minor offense in the biblical framework. This is a violation of the fundamental order of creation. Heaven and earth were meant to be separate. The sons of God were meant to stay in their realm. The daughters of humanity were meant to remain in theirs. And when that boundary was crossed, God declared that the entire experiment of human civilization had to be reset. The daughters of Adam stand at the center of that crossing. They are the bridge between heaven and earth in the most literal and terrifying sense. And understanding their role changes everything about how we read the story of the flood. It was not just about human wickedness. It was about the corruption of the human bloodline itself. And that corruption leads us to the next chapter, where we meet the children born from these forbidden unions. The Nephilim, giants who walked the earth, heroes of old, and perhaps the most frightening beings the world has ever known. Chapter 5. The Nephilim, children of the forbidden union. Genesis 6:4 contains some of the most haunting words in the entire Bible. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Read that again slowly. These were not ordinary children. They were not regular human beings. They were the offspring of celestial beings and human women. They were something new, something the world had never seen before, and something that was never supposed to exist. The word Nephilim comes from the Hebrew root nephel, which means to fall. Some scholars translate it as the fallen ones. Others say it means those who cause others to fall. Either way, the name carries a sense of destruction, of boundaries broken, of a cosmic order violated. The Nephilim were living proof that the wall between heaven and earth had been breached, and that breach came through the daughters of Adam. Ancient texts describe the Nephilim in terrifying detail. The Book of Enoch, which we will explore further in a later chapter, says they were giants, not just tall men. Giants of enormous size who consumed everything around them. 1 Enoch 7:2 through 7005 describes how the Nephilim ate so much that the humans could no longer sustain them. When the food ran out, the Nephilim turned on the humans themselves. They devoured people. They drank blood. They consumed animals, birds, reptiles, and fish. They turned the earth into a nightmare. The Book of Jubilees confirms this account. It says the Nephilim were responsible for spreading violence across the entire earth. They corrupted every living thing. They taught humanity secrets that were never meant to be known. Metallurgy for making weapons of war. Sorcery for manipulating the spiritual world. Cosmetics and beauty arts for seduction and vanity. The knowledge itself was not evil, but the context in which it arrived was catastrophic. It came from fallen beings through forbidden unions. It was tainted from the start, but what comes next will shock you. Because the Nephilim did not just appear and disappear. According to Numbers 13:33, they were still present centuries later. When Moses sent spies into the land of Canaan, the spies returned with a terrifying report. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. This means the Nephilim survived the flood, or at least their bloodline did. Genesis 6:4 hints at this when it says they were on the earth in those days and also afterward. The flood was supposed to wipe the slate clean. It was supposed to eliminate the corruption, but somehow the Nephilim bloodline persisted. How is that possible? Scholars have proposed several explanations. Some say the wives of Noah's sons may have carried Nephilim genes without knowing it. Others suggest that a second incursion of fallen angels occurred after the flood, producing a new generation of Nephilim. And some ancient traditions propose that certain Nephilim survived the flood itself, hiding in deep caves or on mountaintops above the waterline. Whatever the explanation, the result is clear. The bloodline that was born from the union of angels and the daughters of Adam did not end with the flood. It continued, it spread, and it appeared again and again throughout the Old Testament. Think about what this means for the daughters. Their role in this story is not passive. Without the daughters, the Nephilim never exist. Without the Nephilim, Nebuchadnezzar. Without the flood, the entire story of the Bible takes a completely different path. Noah is never chosen. Abraham is never called. Israel is never formed. The entire redemptive plan of God is a response, at least in part, to what happened when the daughters of Adam were taken by the sons of God. These women are the invisible hinge on which the entire biblical narrative turns. Like and subscribe if this is blowing your mind, because the connections we are about to uncover in the next chapters will take this even further. The ancient Jewish historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, also described the Nephilim. He compared them to the giants of Greek mythology. He said they were similar to the Titans, beings of enormous power who challenged the gods themselves. This is a fascinating comparison because many scholars believe that the Greek myths about Titans, about half-divine heroes, and about gods coming down to mate with human women all trace back to the same original stories found in Genesis 6 and the Book of Enoch. The daughters of Adam may not just be biblical figures. They may be the origin of myths that echoed across every ancient culture on Earth. From Mesopotamia to Greece, from Egypt to India, the story of divine beings and human women producing powerful offspring appears everywhere. And at the root of all these stories stand the unnamed daughters of the first man. The Nephilim also raise a profound theological question. If these beings were part human and part angel, did they have souls? Could they be redeemed? Were they covered by God's promises to humanity? The Bible never answers these questions directly, but the silence itself is telling. The Nephilim exist in a gray zone. They are neither fully human nor fully divine. They are hybrid beings born from a union that defied the created order, and their existence suggests that the boundaries God set in creation were not just guidelines, they were laws, and breaking those laws produced consequences that lasted for generations, perhaps for all of history. Chapter 6, The Blood of Cain. Now we must turn to one of the darkest family lines in all of Scripture, the line of Cain. Everyone knows the basic story. Cain killed his brother Abel. God confronted him. Cain lied. God cursed him. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord to live in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Genesis 4:16 through 4:24 traces his descendants through several generations. Enoch, Irad, Mehujael, Methushel, Lamichel. Here is what makes this so remarkable. The genealogy of Cain in Genesis chapter 4 is actually more detailed about women than most people realize. It mentions Lamech's two wives, Ada and Zillah. It mentions It mentions Naamah, the daughter of Zillah. These are among the very few women named in the entire pre-flood narrative. But here is what the text does not explain. Where did Cain get his wife in the first place? He killed Abel. He was driven away from his family. He settled in a distant land. And then the text casually says, Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant. Where did she come from? The traditional answer is that she was one of Adam's unnamed daughters, and that is almost certainly correct. But think about what that means. Cain, the first murderer in human history, married one of the daughters whose names were erased from the Bible. His wife was Adam's daughter. She was Eve's daughter. She left her family and went with the man who had just killed her own brother. Was she forced? Did she go willingly? Was she given to Cain by Adam and Eve as some kind of arrangement? The Bible tells us nothing. Her story is completely blank. And yet she is the mother of an entire civilization. Every descendant of Cain comes through her. Every city Cain built, every invention his line produced, every act of violence and creativity that emerged from the Cainite line traces back to this one unnamed woman. She is one of the most important figures in early human history, and we do not even know her name. The Book of Jubilees names her. It calls her Awan. Awan was Adam and Eve's firstborn daughter, and according to Jubilees, she married Cain. This is deeply significant. If Awan was the oldest daughter, she may have been born close in age to Cain himself. She may have grown up alongside him. She may have known Abel. She may have witnessed the aftermath of the murder, and she chose or was compelled to follow the killer into exile. Comment your thoughts about Awan below. Do you think she went willingly, or was she forced? Now look at what happens to Cain's line. His descendants are associated with innovation. Jabal invented animal herding. Jabal invented music. Tubal-Cain invented metalworking. These are massive advances in human civilization, and they all come from the line of the murderer. This creates a tension in the biblical narrative. Good things, beautiful things, useful things emerge from a cursed bloodline. The editors of Genesis seem uncomfortable with this. They report the innovations but do not celebrate them. They list the names but do not praise them. And then there is Naamah. She is the last woman named in Cain's genealogy. Genesis 4:22 mentions her almost as an afterthought. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. That is it. No explanation of who she was, no description of what she did. Just a name, hanging in the text like a loose thread. but the ancient rabbis had much to say about Naamah. In the Midrash, some traditions identify Naamah as the wife of Noah. If this is true, then Naamah carried the bloodline of Cain through the flood. She survived on the ark. Her genes mixed with Noah's descendants. The cursed line and the righteous line became one. The separation that God seemed to establish between the children of Seth and the children of Cain was undone in a single marriage. Other rabbinic traditions take a darker view. They say Naamah was one of the women who seduced the fallen angels. Her beauty was so extraordinary that the sons of God were drawn to her specifically. In this reading, Naamah is not a passive figure. She is a key player in the corruption of Genesis 6. She is one of the daughters of men whose beauty attracted the heavenly beings to earth. She is a catalyst for the catastrophe that brought the flood. Either way, the daughters of Cain's line played pivotal roles. Whether they carried the cursed bloodline through the flood or attracted the fallen angels to earth, they were agents of enormous change. And just like the daughters of Adam in the direct line, their stories were suppressed. Their names, except for Naamah, were removed. Their contributions were downplayed. The pattern is consistent. Whenever a woman in the early chapters of Genesis does something significant, the text goes quiet. The record thins. The details disappear. But the story does not disappear. It simply moves underground. It hides in the apocryphal books. It whispers in the rabbinic commentaries. It surfaces in the genealogies of the Book of Jubilees and the visions of the Book of Enoch. And in the next chapter, we will follow it into the most detailed and disturbing account of what really happened when the heavenly beings came down to the daughters of humanity. The story of the Watchers and the corruption that nearly ended the human race forever. Chapter 7. The Watchers and the Corruption of Flesh. The Book of Enoch is one of the most important ancient texts ever written. It was composed centuries before the birth of Christ. It was quoted directly in the New Testament. Jude 1:14 through 15 cites Enoch by name. The early church fathers treated it with great respect, and then, somewhere around the 4th century, it was quietly removed from most Christian canons. It survived only in the Ethiopian tradition, where it is still considered sacred scripture. When Western scholars rediscovered the full text in the 18th century, they found something extraordinary. They found the most detailed account of the events described in Genesis 6. They found the story of the Watchers. The Watchers in the Book of Enoch are a specific group of angels. Their original purpose was to watch over humanity. They were stationed in heaven. They were given a role as guardians and observers. But according to 1 Enoch chapters 6 through 11, something went terribly wrong. The Watchers looked down at the earth and saw the daughters of humanity, and they desired them. The leader of the Watchers was Semjasa. He gathered 200 angels on the summit of Mount Hermon, and there they made a pact. They swore an oath together. They agreed to descend to earth, take human wives, and accept whatever consequences followed. This was not a spontaneous decision. It was a conspiracy, a planned rebellion against the order of heaven, and the daughters of Adam were at the center of it. Enoch describes what happened next in vivid detail. The Watchers descended. They chose women from among the daughters of humanity. They taught these women forbidden knowledge. Azazel taught them to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He taught them about metals and how to work them. He taught them about cosmetics and the art of beautifying the eyelids. He taught them about precious stones and coloring agents. Other Watchers taught enchantments, astrology, the cutting of roots, and the reading of the stars. Knowledge poured from heaven to earth through these forbidden unions, and the world was never the same. The women bore children, and those children were the Nephilim. Enoch says they grew to 3,000 ells in height, which is a symbolic way of saying they were impossibly large. They consumed everything. They turned on humanity. Violence filled the earth. Blood soaked the ground, and the cries of the dying rose up to heaven. Subscribe for more revelations from ancient texts that most people have never heard of, because the details in the Book of Enoch change everything about how we understand Genesis. What makes the Book of Enoch so important for our story is that it gives the daughters a context. In Genesis, the daughters appear in a single verse and then vanish. In Enoch, we see the full picture. The daughters were not just objects of desire. They were students. They learned secrets from the Watchers. They gained knowledge that transformed their societies. They became powerful in ways that the pre-flood world had never seen. Some traditions suggest that certain daughters became leaders, priestesses, or even queens of the civilizations that rose before the flood. They were not passive victims. They were participants in a transfer of knowledge that reshaped the world. But this knowledge came at a terrible price. The corruption it brought was total. First, Enoch 8001-8:3 describes how the earth was filled with ungodliness and fornication. The boundaries between species began to break down, not just the boundary between angels and humans, but between different kinds of animals. The text suggests that genetic mixing went far beyond the Watcher-human unions. Everything became corrupted. Every boundary was violated. The entire fabric of creation began to unravel. This is the context for the flood. When Genesis 6:5 says that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time, it is not just talking about moral failure, it is talking about biological corruption. The human bloodline had been contaminated. The image of God in humanity had been distorted by the introduction of angelic DNA. The flood was not just a punishment, it was a genetic reset. God had to preserve the purity of the human line. And Noah was chosen, at least in part, because he was still genetically pure. Genesis 6:9 says, Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. The Hebrew word for blameless, tamim, is the same word used in Leviticus to describe an animal without defect, suitable for sacrifice. Some scholars believe this means Noah's bloodline was uncontaminated. He was pure in his generations, meaning his ancestry had not been mixed with the Watchers. And here is where the daughters become critical once again. If Noah was chosen because his bloodline was pure, then the purity of the bloodline was the central issue. The daughters who married the Watchers had corrupted the line. The daughters who remained faithful had preserved it. The entire salvation of humanity depended on which daughters made which choices. The women were not footnotes. They were the decisive factor. Yet the truth hidden in these ancient records goes deeper still. Because Enoch tells us that the Watchers were judged. God sent his archangels to imprison them. They were bound in chains of darkness beneath the earth. They were sentenced to wait there until the final judgment, and their children, the Nephilim, were allowed to destroy each other. Their spirits after death became the evil spirits that roam the earth. The demons of later biblical tradition are, according to Enoch, the ghosts of the Nephilim, the disembodied spirits of those hybrid children born from the union of Watchers and daughters still haunting the world. This is a staggering claim. It means that the spiritual warfare described throughout the New Testament, the battles against principalities and powers, the exorcisms performed by Jesus, the demonic encounters in the Book of Acts, all trace back to the same event. The Watchers and the daughters, the forbidden union, the children who should never have existed, and the mothers of those children remain unnamed, unremembered, and erased from the official record. The next chapter will confront the final question: why? Why was this silence imposed, and what does it mean for us today? Chapter 8: Why the silence and the truth they buried. We have traveled a long road together. We have uncovered names that were hidden. We have read texts that were excluded. We have traced bloodlines that were supposed to be forgotten. And now we face the final question, the one that has been waiting behind every chapter, every verse, and every silence. Why? Why were the daughters of Adam erased? What was the purpose of the silence? And whose interests did that silence serve? To answer this, we need to understand how the Bible was assembled. The books of the Old Testament did not arrive in their current form all at once. They were written over centuries. They were edited, compiled, and organized by scribes and priests who had specific goals. The Torah, the first 5 books, reached something close to its final form during and after the Babylonian exile, around the 6th and 5th centuries before Christ. The priests and scholars who shaped the final text were working in a very particular context. They had just survived the destruction of Jerusalem. They had watched their temple burn. They had been carried off to a foreign land. And now they were trying to rebuild their identity. They needed a story that would hold the nation together, a story of one God, one people, one pure lineage stretching from Adam through Abraham to themselves. The daughters complicated that story. If you name the daughters, you have to explain their marriages. If you explain their marriages, you have to admit that the earliest unions were between siblings. If you admit that, you create a tension with the laws of Leviticus, which strictly forbid such unions. If you include the Book of Jubilees, you introduce a calendar system and an angelology that competes with the priestly traditions. If you include the Book of Enoch, you elevate fallen angels to a status that threatens the simple monotheism the priests were trying to establish. Everything about the daughters leads to complications. And so the simplest solution was silence. But there is a deeper reason, one that goes beyond editorial convenience. The daughters represented a kind of power that the priestly establishment could not control. Throughout the ancient world, women served as priestesses, oracles, and keepers of sacred knowledge. The religions of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Canaan all had prominent female spiritual leaders. The Israelite priests were engaged in a long struggle to distinguish their religion from these surrounding traditions. One of the ways they did this was by minimizing the role of women in the sacred narrative. Not eliminating them entirely, that would have been too obvious, but reducing them, pushing them to the margins, naming them only when absolutely necessary. The daughters of Adam were the easiest targets for this reduction. They existed before the law, before the covenant, before the nation of Israel. Their stories belonged to a time so ancient that removing them would go unnoticed, and so they were removed. Their names were scraped away. Their contributions were compressed into a single formulaic phrase, and he had other sons and daughters, repeated across generations like a stamp of erasure. Share this video with anyone who believes the Bible tells them the whole story, because what we have uncovered today proves that the whole story has never been told in one place. Now consider the consequences of this silence. For thousands of years, the daughters of Adam have been invisible. Generations of readers have passed over Genesis 5004 without pausing. They have read the genealogies and seen only men. They have built entire theologies on the assumption that the early history of humanity was a story about fathers and sons, but it was not. It was equally a story about mothers and daughters. Without the daughters, there are no wives for the sons. Without the wives, there are no children. Without the children, there is no human race. The daughters are not a footnote, they are half the story, and the half that was hidden may be the half that matters most. Think about what we have learned. We learned that the daughters were named in texts that were excluded from the Bible. We learned that Awan married Cain and Azorah married Seth, making them the mothers of the two great branches of pre-flood humanity. We learned that the beauty of these daughters drew heavenly beings to earth, triggering the most catastrophic event in the ancient world. We learned that their children, the Nephilim, were giants and warriors whose corrupted bloodline nearly destroyed the human race. We learned that the Watchers taught them forbidden knowledge that transformed civilization. And we learned that the spiritual consequences of those unions may still echo in the unseen world around us today. All of this was hidden. All of this was suppressed. And the question you should be asking now is not just what else is hidden in the margins of the Bible. The question is, what changes when you know the truth? Does it shake your faith, or does it deepen it? Because knowing that the Bible has layers, knowing that there are ancient texts that fill in the gaps, knowing that the story of humanity is richer and more complex than any single book can contain, that is not a threat to faith. It is an invitation to go deeper. It is a challenge to stop reading the surface and start digging beneath it. Like and subscribe if this journey has opened your eyes to something new, and comment below telling us which part of the daughter's story surprised you the most. We read every single comment. The daughters of Adam lived. They loved. They married. They gave birth. They shaped the destiny of every person who has ever walked this earth, and they deserve to be remembered, not as nameless shadows in a genealogy, not as silent figures erased by editors with agendas, but as the women they were, the mothers of nations, the keepers of secrets, the bridges between heaven and earth. Their story is not over. It has only just begun to be told. And perhaps the greatest revelation is this: the silence that hid them for so long is itself a kind of proof. You do not bury something that does not matter. You do not erase a name that carries no power. The very effort to make them disappear tells us that they were more important than we ever imagined. And now, after thousands of years, their voices are finally beginning to be heard again.